Michael Franzese was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1951. Although not his biological father, reputed mob enforcer Sonny Franzese adopted young Michael and raised him as if he were his own bloodline. Sonny was the underboss of the Colombo family and well known for his violent abilities. Sonny had different plans for his son though. He did not want him to follow in his footsteps, and once slapped Michael when his grades slipped below an A- average. It was the only time he became violent with him. Michael was also a good athlete, something his father was very proud and supportive of. Sonny championed his All-American son to continue on the academic path he was on. In 1969, Franzese enrolled in Hofstra University and would begin his pre-med program. 2 years earlier, Sonny was arrested for a nationwide bank robbery ring and sentenced to 50 years in prison. He felt his father was framed because his 4 co-defendants were drug addicts. Sonny was an old-school mobster who despised drugs and would never involve addicts in one of his criminal excursions. He didn't like the heat they brought from law enforcement and sloppy decisions people made while under the influence. On top of believing he was wrongly incarcerated, the family struggled financially. Michael lost interest in school due to his family's problems and decided to drop out of college in order to support them. Sonny heard this news and summoned him to Leavenworth Federal Prison for a meeting. Michael was adamant about quitting school despite his father's reservations. After talking for a while, Sonny realized his son was going to do what he wanted, but an important question remained: would he be willing to kill somebody? Michael said if it were for the right reasons under the right circumstances. Sonny then agreed to have his son introduced to some of his associates. In 1974, Franzese became a made man. He quickly showed his value to the bosses through his strong business acumen and devised revenue streams that were groundbreaking for his line of work. 5 years later, he was promoted to capo in the Colombo family. Already a good earner, Franzese would be given an opportunity to increase his wealth to new heights. Lawrence Irizzo contacted Franzese in 1981 in need of assistance. Years earlier, Irizzo had created a scheme to defraud the federal government out of millions of tax dollars on gasoline, but was receiving problems from gangsters in California. He offered Franzese a percentage in the scheme if he could help protect him and ultimately solve the issue. Franzese agreed and went to work creating a whole new infrastructure. The pair set up around 20 shell companies in Panama because of the law that allowed wholesale companies to sell gasoline tax-free to each other. Russian mobsters in Brooklyn would be brought in the scam because of their ownership of independent gas stations. The scheme worked by having one company sell the gas that would be shipped to the second, while the third sham company would buy the gas on paper, then forge the tax documents. Franzese and his crew pocketed the 9 cents federal tax and the 25 to 30 cents state tax on each gallon sold, making them millions. When agents would try and collect the money from the dummy company, they would declare bankruptcy and start the process over. They were reported to have provided nearly half the gas in the New York metropolitan area. Franzese said in Vlad TV interview that the gas fraud made a lot of people happy because they offered the lowest prices. Other gangsters loved the money they saved every time they filled up their tanks. There were many estimates as to how much money Franzese was making from the racket. He has claimed that he was making around $1 to $2 million a week, even saying that figure rose to $8 million at times. With hundreds of millions of dollars, Franzese is considered one of the wealthiest mobsters since Al Capone, and the gas fraud, the most lucrative mafia venture since bootlegging alcohol during Prohibition. In 1986, Fortune magazine included him in their 50 most wealthy, powerful mafia bosses, making him the youngest member of the club at just 34. It was a type of attention that Franzese did not want, and it put a big target on his back. Since his early days in the mob, Franzese had plenty of legitimate businesses like car dealerships, construction companies, a movie production company, and was a silent partner in a sports management business. The problem was, he couldn't shake the eyes of the federal agents who were after the millions of dollars owed to the government. It is an issue that has locked up many organized crime figures, including Al Capone. The government wants its money and will provide all resources possible to get it. By 1985, Franzese would be under indictment in New York and Florida. He had beat 5 such cases before, but this time was different because of agents had a line of informants ready to turn on their boss. They locked him up without bail. Irizzo, his partner in the gas scheme, was one of those witnesses who testified. With the odds heavily stacked against him, Franzese pled guilty to 1 count of racketeering conspiracy and 1 count of tax conspiracy. He was sentenced to 10 years and ordered to pay nearly $15 million in restitution. After 43 months in prison, Franzese was released in 1989 on parole. He was subpoenaed to testify against his former partner in his sports management business. Prosecutors granted him immunity in that case for his testimony, but they did not consider him a federal informant. They continually tried to get him to flip without success. Franzese explained the situation differently on the Pat McAfee show in 2019. I'm going to be honest with you. Number one, I never put anybody in prison. I didn't cooperate with the government in that regard. I played the game with the government and I made them think I was cooperating, but at the end of the day, I didn't cooperate. You know, it was just my way of doing things and I got in trouble for it. I mean, they put me back in prison as a result when they realized what I was doing, but I never put anybody in prison. When they wanted me to testify, I refused. In 1991, Franzese would be sent back to jail for 4 years because of a probation violation stemming from this incident. He became a born-again Christian during this time in prison, and when he was released in 1994, he vowed to change his life and leave the mob for good. Agents said that it would be impossible unless he entered the witness protection program. Franzese knew there was a contract out on his life. He heard his father had even agreed with it and did not protect him. Franzese said that he understood the position his father was in. Even though Michael was his son, in the world of the Mafia, that didn't matter. Besides their relation, Sonny had vouched for his son to be inducted into the mob. That meant that he could be killed if he didn't allow the hit to happen. Franzese moved to California and was vigilant about protecting his family. He didn't return to New York for 12 years and only with heavy security. In a strange twist of fate, in 2010, Franzese's brother John Jr. agreed to wear a wire and testify against their father. John Jr. was a longtime drug addict that was constantly getting into trouble. He wasn't really involved with mob business like his brother and father. Sonny was sentenced to 8 years and released in 2017 at the age of 100. 3 years later, he would die at 103 years old. Michael Franzese still lives in California with his wife. They have 7 children and 6 grandchildren. He's the author of 7 books and works as a motivational speaker. Many have wondered about how many people Franzese personally killed or ordered killed during his time in organized crime. Specific numbers aren't really out there, but in interviews, he has alluded to plenty of instances where he had to get violent. He's fairly vague and never specifically talks about murder. Knowing his line of work, one can safely assume that he participated in his share of violent retribution. Since its release from prison over 25 years ago, it has baffled law enforcement and people with knowledge of his case how he left the Mafia and is still alive to this day, especially given the fact that he has freely talked about his criminal life. The narrative became that he somehow bought his way out through tens of millions of dollars that he had stashed away. Franzese says one of the main things keeping him alive is that he never put anybody in prison. Even with a contract on his life, he never made any mortal enemies by ratting people out, and that has lessened the desire to kill him. Another important aspect was that he moved his family to California and remained extremely disciplined about the way he lived his life, always aware of his surroundings and never sticking to the same routine. He said that if they were going to kill him, he was going to make it extremely difficult. The biggest factor in Franzese living a long and fulfilling life is that he's outlived everyone from his past. Out of all the other mobsters in that Fortune article, he's the only one not dead or in jail. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more of our Mafia TV series, please like and subscribe. Until next time, forget about it.